I didn't expect her to notice me. Most mornings, I was just the kid hunched in the corner booth at Graham's cafe, pretending to study, watching the condensation run down my mug. The place smelled like burnt toast and espresso grounds that had been there for years. Safe, predictable. But she walked in one Tuesday, and the air bent around her. Not loudly, no heels clacking, no grand entrance. Just a woman in her 40s, hair pulled back like she didn't care if it fell loose, carrying herself with that practice these people get after they've lived through enough. She ordered black coffee, nothing else. Didn't even glance at the pastry case. I caught myself staring when she leaned on the counter, one hand flat against the wood, nails short and unpolished. The barista called her by name. I remembered it instantly. When her eyes flicked toward me, quick as a reflex, I looked down too late. My thumb pressed a little harder into the dog-eared page of my book, like that would cover me. The next morning, she was back. Same coffee, same unbothered presence. But when she passed my table, she slowed just enough to glance at the textbook. "Statistics?" she said, voice low, like she didn't want to disturb the quiet. "Yeah," I muttered, flipping the page even though I hadn't finished the last one. "Trying to. It's not really sticking." Her mouth pulled into the smallest curve. Not a smile exactly, but something adjacent. She tapped her cup with her finger. "Coffee helps. Or doesn't. Depends." And then she walked on. That was it. 2 sentences. But I replayed them all day. I kept coming back, even earlier now. The barista started asking if I wanted, my usual, before I spoke. Sometimes she'd already be there when I arrived, reading the paper, underlining things with a ballpoint pen like she was correcting the world in secret. I never asked what she did, never asked too much of anything. But slowly, the silence between us filled in. One afternoon, I was scribbling equations when she slid into the booth across from me without asking. "You keep frowning at the same problem." I froze, pen in hand. Yeah? I don't get it." She pulled the paper toward her. Her handwriting was neater than mine. She solved it in 2 steps, then pushed it back like it was nothing. I laughed once, quietly. "I've been at that for an hour. Overthinking," she said. "People your age always do." I almost asked her what she meant by "your age," but instead I watched her fold the napkin beside her cup into a crooked triangle. She didn't notice me noticing. After that, it wasn't just math problems. We traded small remarks about the weather, the too loud jazz music, the broken sugar dispenser. Little things that stacked up, fragile but steady. But at night, when I lay in bed with the glow of my phone screen on my face, I typed out messages I never sent. Just lines like "good to see you today" or "did you finish the crossword?" My thumb hovered, then slid back. Always unsent. That Tuesday evening, after the cafe had emptied, I gathered my books and was halfway out the door when her voice caught me. "You're always leaving so fast," she said, almost to herself. Then, louder, "Walk with me." The street outside was dark, wet from an earlier rain. I hesitated, books clutched too tightly under my arm. I don't know why, but my chest felt tight, like something irreversible was about to begin. We walked side by side that night, her pace slower than I expected, hands tucked into her coat pockets. The street lamps flickered overhead, catching the silver in her hair. I kept waiting for her to say something, but she didn't, and somehow that silence felt heavier than small talk ever could. Halfway down the block, she glanced over. "You live in the building next to mine, don't you?" It startled me. I nodded. "Yeah. Upstairs. Been there about a year." Her mouth twitched like she was piecing something together. "I thought so. My sister lives with me now. She'd probably recognize you if she wasn't always busy." The word sister stuck with me, though I wasn't sure why. I tightened my grip on the books under my arm. We ended up outside her building without realizing. She hesitated, hand hovering over the railing. "Tea?" she asked finally, voice casual, as if the question didn't matter. Inside, her apartment was warmer than I expected, cluttered in a lived-in way. Books stacked sideways on the floor, a sweater draped over the arm of the couch. I sat awkwardly at the edge while she filled the kettle. The faint whistle of steam filled the room. "Divorced 5 years," she said suddenly, without looking at me. She opened the cupboard for mugs. "My son's older than you." "Probably. 26. I blinked, unsure if she meant it as a warning or a confession. "I'm 24. I said quietly, like that balanced the math somehow. She carried over 2 mugs, setting mine down too close to my hand. "That's about what I guessed." Then she added, almost under her breath, "Too young." The tea burned my tongue, though I pretended it didn't. My mind ran circles. Why invite me in? Why say too young if she didn't want me here? I caught myself glancing at her hands, the way she wrapped them around her cup, fingers loose but deliberate, like she needed the heat. We sat in silence that wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't safe either. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly. My phone buzzed once in my pocket, and I didn't look. "You don't talk much," she said after a while, leaning back. I laughed nervously. "Guess I don't have much worth saying." Her gaze lingered, soft but unflinching. "That's not true." The kettle whistle was still echoing faintly in my ears when her sister's footsteps creaked in the hallway. The sound made her straighten, shoulders tightening, as if suddenly reminded of something. She reached over and picked at the corner of a napkin on the table, folding it into a neat square. I should have stood, made an excuse, gone back to my apartment. But I stayed, holding the mug between my palms, watching her fold and refold that napkin. At some point, her fingers brushed mine when she reached for the sugar. Barely anything, a touch that could have been an accident. But it stayed with me longer than the taste of tea. I don't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. The next few weeks shifted quietly. I found myself timing my mornings to hers, not on purpose, I told myself, but it kept happening. She'd pause at my table, say a word or two, sometimes sit for a minute if the cafe was empty. It was nothing. It was everything. One Saturday, I carried laundry down the narrow stairwell and nearly ran into her sister, balancing a basket against her hip. "You're the guy from upstairs," she said, squinting at me like she was matching a face to a half-memory. "Yeah," I answered, stepping aside. "Just laundry." She smiled faintly, unreadable. "She mentioned you." I didn't ask what was said. Didn't want to know. But the words echoed all afternoon. That night she knocked on my door. No warning. Just a soft tap, and there she was, hair loose this time, cardigan slipping off one shoulder. "My Wi-Fi's dead," she said. "Can I steal yours for a bit?" I moved aside. She stepped in like it was nothing, though the air shifted immediately. My apartment was too bare, too obviously lived in by someone passing through life. She noticed the stack of takeout containers near the sink, the one plant barely hanging on. "You need better lighting," she murmured, pulling out her phone. We sat side by side on the couch, her screen casting a glow across both of us. Close enough that I could smell the faint citrus of her shampoo. Too close. At one point, our knees brushed. Neither of us moved. She scrolled absently, then said, "You remind me of someone I used to know. Back when I was your age." Her voice thinned, almost breaking on the last word. I wanted to ask who. I wanted to ask everything. Instead, I just nodded, my throat too tight. Her phone buzzed. A message. She read it, then locked the screen, face turning away from me. The light was gone. "Maybe I should go," she said, standing too quickly. I panicked. "Or stay. Just until it's working again." Her eyes lingered on mine, searching, measuring something. Then she sat back down, slower this time. The silence thickened around us. I reached for the remote, fumbling for distraction, but my hand stopped halfway. Hers was resting on the cushion, fingers curled slightly. My chest tightened with the absurd thought of placing my hand over hers. Just that. Nothing more. The clock ticked. My hand hovered, then pulled back. She noticed. Of course she noticed. Her lips parted, then closed again. I almost said something then, anything to break the moment, but her sister's laugh carried through the wall, muffled but sharp enough to snap everything back into place. We both froze. Her eyes met mine one last time, too long, too heavy. She exhaled softly, stood, and smoothed her cardigan back over her shoulder. "Thanks for the Wi-Fi," she whispered, heading for the door. I followed her with my eyes, wanting, almost moving, almost speaking. But the door clicked shut before I could doubt it happened on an ordinary evening. Late, after the cafe had closed, after the streets had emptied. She was walking home, grocery bag in one hand, keys jingling in the other. I caught up to her by accident, or maybe not. "You're out late," I said, falling into step beside her. She glanced at me, the corner of her mouth twitching. "So are you." We didn't talk for a while. The air was cool, the kind that made you see your breath. Her bag shifted, heavy, and before she could protest I took it from her. Our hands brushed in the exchange, brief, but neither of us mentioned it. We stopped at the bench near her building. She lowered herself onto it, and I followed, setting the bag between us like a barrier. "I almost moved away last year," she said suddenly. I turned to her. "Why didn't you?" She hesitated, pulling at the cuff of her sleeve. "Too tired. Too complicated." And then, she trailed off. I waited. "Then I got used to certain routines," she finished, eyes flicking toward me, quick as lightning. My throat tightened. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the words caught. Instead, I shifted, tapping my fingers against my knee. She noticed. She always noticed. "You're restless," she said softly. I laughed once, hollow. "Or just stupid." Her brow furrowed. "Don't say that." "Why not?" I shot back, more raw than I meant. "Because I'm here, wasting nights in coffee shops, waiting for—" I stopped. The rest dangled unsaid. Her silence answered for her. She folded her hands together, knuckles white. For a moment neither of us moved. Finally, she whispered, "You don't know what you're asking for." I stared at her, heart pounding. "Maybe I do." Her breath caught, just faintly. She looked away, watching a car pass at the end of the street. "I can't. I shouldn't." "Because of the age thing?" My voice was sharper than I meant. Her head snapped back toward me. "Because everything gets ruined when people want too much." That landed heavier than anything she'd said before. I watched her rub her thumb along the edge of the bench, over and over, as if polishing down a thought she couldn't say. The bag between us rustled when the wind picked up. I wanted to reach across it, to close the space, but I stayed frozen. She finally looked at me, really looked, her eyes searching mine with a mix of fear and something else I didn't want to name. "I can't promise you anything," she whispered. "Not tomorrow. Not even tonight." The words burned. Still, I leaned forward slightly, unable to stop myself. She didn't move back. The air between us shifted, stretched. One more breath and we'd cross it. One more inch. Then she exhaled, closing her eyes for a beat too long. When they opened again, she asked, barely audible, almost breaking, "What are we doing?" The night on the bench hung in the air for days. I replayed it like a skip track, waiting for the moment we'd circle back, finish the sentence we left undone. But she changed. At the cafe, she barely looked my way. Her coffee order was clipped, her seat chosen at the far end, paper raised like a wall. I told myself it was coincidence. That she was busy, tired. But when I tried to catch her eye, she lowered her gaze to the headlines instead. I stopped going for a while. Told myself I had work, deadlines. Truth was, I couldn't stand the space between us, that silent reminder that I'd leaned forward and she hadn't. One night, walking up the stairwell, I heard voices from her apartment. A man's voice. Low, steady. Hers softer, but carrying a laugh I hadn't heard before. I froze halfway, keys in my hand, listening too long, too guilty. My chest tightened, and I went upstairs without turning the lock. Days blurred. I fell into new routines, headphones in, groceries late, sitting in my apartment with the glow of my laptop for company. I'd check my phone too often, not for messages exactly, but for the chance of one. Nothing came. Then, a week later, I saw her outside with a boy, not a boy, a man. Tall, mid-20s, carrying a duffel bag. She touched his shoulder lightly as he loaded it into her car. The way she touched him wasn't how she touched me. It was easier, older. I realized then. Her son. She saw me across the lot, and for a flicker of a second, her face broke. Not guilt. Something heavier. She lifted her hand halfway, like she might wave, then lowered it again. I walked inside before she could decide. That night, I typed a message, "I'm sorry if I made things harder." My thumb hovered over the send button. I read it twice, 3 times, waiting for the courage that never came. In the end, I locked my phone and set it face down on the table. The cafe felt different when I finally went back. Her usual spot was empty. The barista said she hadn't been around all week. I sat in my corner, staring at the steam from my cup, waiting for her to walk in. She didn't. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused. Like life forgot to finish the sentence. The napkin on the table lay folded in half, untouched. My pen tapped against it until the ink bled through. I almost left it there, a trace, a signal, something she might see if she came back. Instead, I crumpled it in my fist, stood, and left the seat empty behind me. It was late when I saw her again. Not at the cafe, not in passing, but on the narrow landing between our doors. She was fumbling with her keys, grocery bag balanced awkwardly on her hip. The sound of it nearly spilling drew me out of my apartment before I could think. "Here," I said, taking the bag. She froze, then let me. A pause stretched as I set it carefully on the floor. "I haven't seen you," I added, too quietly. "I know." Her voice was low, flat at first, but softer as it went. "I thought it would be easier." I nodded, though my chest tightened. "Was it?" She leaned against the wall, folding her arms, avoiding my eyes. "Not really." The hallway light hummed above us, too bright for the hour. I shoved my hands into my pockets, waiting for her to say more. She didn't. So I did. "That night." My words stuck. I tried again. "I wasn't imagining it, was I?" Her eyes flicked to mine then, sharp but tired, like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "No," she said. "You weren't." It felt like something cracked open in the silence that followed. My pulse raced, but I didn't move closer. I didn't dare. She pressed a hand to her forehead, almost laughing at herself. "You're too young. I keep telling myself that. And then I hear your door, or see you at that cafe, and it doesn't matter how many times I repeat it." I swallowed. "Do you want me to stop showing up?" Her mouth opened, then closed. She shook her head slowly. "No. That's the worst part." The hallway went still. All I could hear was the faint ticking of her watch as her arms loosened. "I don't know what this is," she whispered, "but I can't keep pretending it isn't there." I stepped closer without realizing. Just one step. Not enough to touch, but enough to make it impossible to pull away without breaking something. Her shoulders softened, the fight leaving her posture. Finally, her eyes met mine with a kind of fragile steadiness. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of what it means. Of what people will think. Of you." I nodded, throat tight. "Me too." We stood there, nothing dramatic, just 2 people on a landing with groceries on the floor. Yet it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. I lifted the bag back into her hands, careful not to brush her fingers this time. She held it against her chest, looking down at it like it was the only anchor she had. Then, softer than I expected, she smiled. Small. Real. "Okay," she said. And that was it. No promises. No declarations. Just that one word. But it was enough to feel like something had finally been spoken into the air. Months blurred into new seasons. The cafe changed its hours, the barista rotated out, even the chairs looked different. But every morning, at 8:47, there was still black coffee waiting at the counter, one for her, one for me. It never became routine the way people imagine. Some mornings she'd skip, and I'd sit alone, tracing the rim of my mug until it cooled. Other times I'd be buried in work, show up late, and find her already halfway through the crossword, tapping her pen against the margin like she knew I'd appear eventually. We never named it. We never had to. There were walks still, sometimes quiet, sometimes full of stories I hadn't heard before, the kind she'd never told anyone else, not even her sister. There were nights when she'd knock, ask for my Wi-Fi again, and stay just long enough for the kettle to whistle. She still folded napkins when she was nervous. I still noticed. And the bench. The same one near her building. We'd pass it, glance, remember? Sometimes we'd sit, grocery bag between us again, only this time I wouldn't hesitate to slide it aside. Her son visited once more that spring. I shook his hand, felt his eyes linger on me too long. She caught the tension, pressed her fingers lightly against my back when no one was looking, the smallest reassurance. I carried that touch for days. Life didn't smooth itself out. She still worked late. I still forgot to water the plant in my apartment. There were moments when guilt crept in, when doubt flickered at the edges. But it never drowned us. Because somewhere along the way, the silence that used to stretch like a threat became comfortable. Safe. One evening, months after that night on the landing, we ended up in her kitchen. I'd brought takeout, she'd made tea. The clock ticked, the steam curled, the world kept moving outside the window. And in that small space, without ceremony, I reached across the counter. This time, she didn't pull back. Her hand met mine halfway, no hesitation. Not a kiss, not a declaration. Just that, two hands resting on a scarred wooden table. I looked at her, and she smiled, quiet but steady. "Okay," she said again. That was all. No fireworks. No endings. Just a life that kept unfolding, day after day, with her beside me in ways that mattered most. I didn't need more than that. And if I think back now, to the first black coffee, the first folded napkin, the first night on the bench, I realized those were the beginnings we were already living, even before we had the courage to admit it. It wasn't a story about falling. It was a story about staying. Backhand index pointing right. Did this story stay with you? What kind of quiet, real love stories do you want to hear next?